Welcome, everybody. My name is Katya Wald. I'm the Executive Director here at the MIT Enterprise Forum of Cambridge. Just one quick note, we're gonna go until about 8 o'clock, and then from 8 to 9, we're gonna do a reception upstairs at the R&D Pub, which is on the 4th floor. This building's really hard to navigate, so I'll try to lead everybody that way. You just have to find the elevators and take them up to the 4th floor. So please, if you do plan on staying, I'm gonna try to get all of these folks up there. So if you can wait for your questions up there, that'd be great. So for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do, the MIT Enterprise Forum does programs focused on identifying the technologies and issues that matter. It's part of our goal to help early stage entrepreneurs. So these programs engage all the stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem. We also do what we call practical content tailored for entrepreneurs to help them tackle real world challenges. So we have a class that we run called Start Smart for early stage entrepreneurs. We have a mentor program. We do pitch clinics, and we do something similar to a demo day type thing at the end of our year. We are not your traditional incubator or accelerator where you have to apply and you do a fixed time. We run these programs at least 2 to 3 times a year. So we welcome anybody to check out when our next program is. To that effect, our next big program is called the Beantown Throwdown. That is our student pitch competition. We have 15 student entrepreneurs from universities all around Boston and I believe even a little bit further, coming to pitch against one another, and the audience votes for their favorite. It's a really great event. Hopefully some of you can come and join and support those young entrepreneurs. We have an event on term sheets for startups. We're doing another event on sports rehab and game-changing innovations. We are doing something on the future of microbiome. And we also have another Eat Your Vegetables session, which is bookkeeping and taxes for startups. I always thought that one would be really boring, but that draws about 100 people every time. We also, our application deadline for our mentor program is open right now from October 16th to November 15th. So if you're interested in mentoring a startup or being mentored by our network of folks, please make sure to register and apply. With that, I'm going to introduce Khalid, our moderator for tonight, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Katya. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Can everyone hear me well? Good. Tonight, everyone showed up, obviously, to hear us talk about esports, blockchain, and gaming, and really how all those things are coming together for the esports ecosystem. And I want to start, however, by last year we did this, and we had a lot of the same people, some different people on panel here, but a lot of the same people. And I started by doing somewhat of a primer, and if you track back 12 months ago, each 12 months you go backwards in time in esports, fewer and fewer people know what it is, and the length of time of the primer was longer, and now you track 12 months forward and forward. The primer gets much shorter as everyone kind of has their arms around what they believe to be the esports ecosystem. So I'd like to start by, this is the 2017 esports ecosystem, and it says this very purposefully because the world in esports doesn't look terribly different from what you see up here, and I'll explain some of these things in broad strokes. But what has changed is the advent of some of the topics that we'll talk about today and how they fit in to this. And so the esports ecosystem in broad strokes, and people really want to focus on how do you make money in esports? That's the question I get asked the most of anything. How do you actually make money? And the ecosystem consists of teams, obviously. You have folks like Liquid and TSM and Fnatic, the large organizations who field players and teams and have individuals who entertain online. And you have the platforms, like Twitch being the largest, most popular such platforms, YouTube gaming, where they supply their content to. And obviously that's being sponsored by someone, and at the top you have the brands who are doing sponsorship, who are hoping to gain brand recognition in much the same way that they do in traditional sports. And out here on the far left, you have the publishers of the games, whether it be Riot with League of Legends and new games that they're coming out with, or Blizzard Activision with Overwatch. Interestingly enough, in the esports ecosystem, the publishers sort of serve a dual role, as they not only make the games, but they also oversee the leagues in which the games are played. So one major, as we go through this discussion, one major distinction that I always like to make, hopefully I'm preaching to most of the choir here, but one distinction that I like to make is that unlike traditional sports, where no one owns the IP of football, no one, where you see the XFL is coming out here new again after 20-year hiatus, no one owns baseball, no one owns basketball. You can come out with, you and I, all of us together can come together and make a basketball league tomorrow if we wanted to. The same is not true for esports. We couldn't come out tomorrow and just declare that we're gonna have a League of Legends league without Riot sanctioning it or somehow approving it. And that's the same for all others. And that distinction is pretty major as we talk about ideas around blockchain and esports, as we talk about how gaming interacts with esports, and a question of who needs who more. And then in the middle you have here are some of these third-party organizers. And so ESL, E-League, PGL, you see some of those organizations, those are tournament hosts or league hosts. So they get together and they have an idea. ESL says, I want to do an Overwatch tournament, or I want to do a CSGO league. And they put on the production, make their content deal with Twitch, and ultimately garner the license from a publisher that you have over here on the left to host that tournament. So that's in broad strokes what the esports ecosystem looks like, and a lot of the questions, or the questions in the main that we'll be asking today, is how does blockchain fit into this? How does gaming fit into this? And quite frankly, how will it be changed by those things, potentially for the good and sometimes potentially not? So I want to go through a few slides just kind of about the industry in general. Esports, in my opinion, it has arrived. It has arrived for a while now, and you see the fandom from 2016 through 2020 going through the roof. That will continue to increase. And this year, in 2019, it's projected for the first time, global esports revenues will surpass $1 billion. So I guess esports is officially a unicorn as of this year. How that matrix is diced and sliced, many people argue about, and who's getting the money. Do the players actually see it? Where is it going? That's a far different question. But the germane point is that the financial ecosystem, the fan ecosystem, what fuels this continues to grow, and for a lot of demographic reasons will continue to do so. Attendant to the growth in esports, and we won't talk about this as much today, but it's very important, that undergirds a lot of the discussion that we're having, is the explosive growth of live streaming, specifically fueled by Twitch, but also others such as YouTube Gaming and Facebook are on the live streaming revolution. And what live streaming does, as most people in this room likely already know, it allows any individual person to be their own live broadcaster. Mostly it's been, traditionally Twitch was kids watching other kids play video games, and that's still the predominant amount of content on Twitch, and Twitch controls about 75% of the live streaming audience. The fastest growing audience on Twitch, however, is non-gaming content. And it is at least this person's belief that for this particular demographic, 13-year-old is the youngest age at which you can be on Twitch, is that increasingly into the future, a 13-year-old today in 2024 is a voter. And where will they get their news, information, political source information? It's probably not CNN, MSNBC, and the other cable news networks that we do. It likely may even be from a fellow gamer on something like Twitch. And so how are we using utensils like this, knowing that this is where this demographic traffics, knowing it's the largest growth place for content, specifically live, and knowing what started as a gaming platform is increasingly being used for non-gaming content. And as you see here, I want to point out, if you look at audience size on the far right, this is really blows my mind. There's a larger audience size than HBO, Spotify, Netflix, iHeartRadio, ESPN. It blows it out the water. These are statistics that when you show to people in those industries particularly, they figure it out. It's really the village is being threatened and being washed away by the tsunami before they even know it came. So that's particularly of import. And concomitantly, this is just the flip side of it, particularly with the age group that we're really interested in. Less TV means more live streaming, but probably the opposite. More live streaming means less TV, particularly within this 18 to 34 segment you see here on the far right. That's traditional television viewing. In the third quarter of 2018, it's plummeting. And you see this downward trend here in weekly viewing of linear traditional television. So we know it's going live. We know it's going towards gaming. We know it's going towards esports. And so with that, that ends the boring, methodical portion of the primer. And we'll get to our panelists who are true experts in the field. I will introduce myself. I'm Khalid Jones. I'm managing partner of Source Shark Partners. We are a small family office investment company, and we have made, back in 2015, when it was truly the wild, wild west, we made an investment into an esports team called EchoFox, which was recently sold actually in the last couple of weeks. We remain very active in the esports ecosystem and space, and all of the places in the penumbra of esports where we can gain learnings. So before we get to the questions, I'll actually have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll dive right in. And I want to repeat what Katja said at the beginning. At the very end, we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A, maybe a little bit longer. And then when we're done, we'll usher everyone very quickly up into the fourth floor to the R&D pub. So please, Jonathan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Baha'i. I am the president of the Peerplays Blockchain Standards Association. Back in 2016, we founded the Peerplays blockchain. The blockchain is essentially a blockchain that's dedicated to provably fair gaming. And back then, since then, we've been making recommendations in regards to various operations and functions which would allow for peer-to-peer gaming worldwide. Right now, we've actually just introduced this past year a functional application which is called Bookie Pro, which allows for peer-to-peer sports betting worldwide via a sports betting exchange. We've also introduced a series of functions via the Peerplays blockchain, which allows for sweepstakes lottos to take place worldwide. To draw an easy comparison, essentially, a lot of you probably know Bitcoin. You know the power of Bitcoin is in regards to its decentralization and how it operates with multiple actors around the world to produce a distributed ledger. Peerplays is the same thing. We don't control Peerplays. It is a decentralized public blockchain which allows for anybody in the world to be able to interact and be able to directly engage with one another in with various functions to allow for peer-to-peer sports betting exchange, for sweepstakes lottos like 50-50, to allow charities to be able to raise money worldwide. And as a matter of fact, this quarter we'll be introducing something called Streamer's Edge, which is going to get into the world of streaming. Of course, with esports, and of course, that is going to utilize the power of the blockchain in order to allow for players worldwide to be able to interact and be able to engage with one another and increase engagement amongst players, which we believe is the key factor in what is causing all of this growth in the industry.
Hey everyone, my name is John Fallon. I'm the general counsel at a company called High Five Games. We primarily make slot machine games, but through my job, I am well versed in a lot of the regulatory paradigms that exist in all the regulated gambling markets, most of Europe and across the United States. One of the reasons I believe I'm here to speak on this is people are starting to look at esports and how that the gambling markets can actually influence who's actually getting involved and who's actually watching the esports. Aside from 13-year-olds, they don't have the bankroll, but if you can get some 50-year-olds to start watching, some real money can actually be getting thrown into it and put behind it. But like with a lot of regulated things, the government does not like things they don't understand. And so we see that on a regular basis in all forms of gambling, that any kind of advances in technology that causes the government concern that they're not going to be able to control or fully understand who's involved and when someone's actually getting engaged, and how the rest of their concerns, such as age verification, money laundering, things of that nature, can be addressed through the blockchain technology and through esports in and of itself, how that's going to actually play out in the long run.
Hi, I'm Giovanna Fessenden. I'm an intellectual property attorney with Hamilton, Brook, Smith & Reynolds. I'm a blockchain enthusiast, and my background's in computer science. I help companies protect their technology and in patents and copyrights, trademarks, and help them license it. My particular expertise is in blockchain. I've been working with blockchain companies and innovators in this space since late 2014. That are acquiring blockchain companies to do their due diligence and make sure that the technology is up to snuff and their licenses are adequate. And I also help them file for patent protection and make sure that their technology is going to be protected.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marco Mereu. I am the Senior Vice President of Content Distribution for Super League Gaming and also the GM of Framerate. I was also the founder of Framerate, which is a company I had founded about 18 months ago and was acquired by Super League in June of this year. Framerate was one of the largest social video networks and brands for gamers and esports enthusiasts, where we would drive content to them where they watch it and build communities. Super League Gaming, for those that don't know, is one of the larger amateur esports organizations out there, running tournaments, almost 1,000 events per year in games from Fortnite to League of Legends, with partners like Riot and Epic Games around the country, and trying to really own that amateur esports space, which is really enormous right now.
Hi, I'm Kevin Mitchell. I'm Director of Business Development for National Amusements. We're a small, privately held company. We have a controlling interest in Viacom and CBS, as well as an early stage investment arm called Advanced Capital that's highly focused on the esports and immersive experience space. I'm also a college esports professor, as well as a founder of College Esports Expo, which is the first collegiate conference dedicated to collegiate esports, as well as an executive advisor on the Grammy Music Education Coalition. We're currently working on a project with Twitch to launch a Grammy Music Education channel through Twitch. We have a partnership with Morgan Stanley, and we have a big project that's being launched in November. I'm also in the esports venture space, in the college esports venture space as well.
Giovanna, I'd like to start with you. I'm fascinated by the blockchain space, if only for the reason that I know enough to be dangerous to myself and probably others. And so with respect to the esports space in particular and blockchain, what is the future that you see with respect to esports and gaming? And if there are others in the room who are just as dangerous to themselves and others with the information, maybe a little small primer, and then how that leads into the future with respect to esports.
Great. When I look at the future with the interface between esports and gaming and blockchain, I see a universal wallet as being a central component in integrating and maintaining interoperability and making the whole space blossom. So the blockchain is a perfect technology to help maintain a wallet, because you can manage transactions on the blockchain, and there's a lot of transparency and security. It's very difficult to delete or modify anything without it going unnoticed. And it also allows users to have a lot of control over with their public and private keys. So everything can be traced back to the public key for every transaction that is on the blockchain. So the blockchain, I see it as being the backbone of this universal wallet that would help maintain all electronic assets whether it's in the gaming space, whether it's skins, and also wagers, bets, for all those sorts of transactions in the esports space, as well as in games. And I think also just, I'm lucky enough to be sort of on the cutting edge of all different areas of technologies and industries, being a patent lawyer. And in the blockchain space, there are so many different industries that are utilizing the blockchain for managing assets. Like Louis Vuitton, for example, has their own blockchain and wallet that helps manage all of their luxury goods through the supply chain to the point of purchase at a customer. You also have like the MLB, they have their own blockchain, and you can purchase, there's like a bobblehead of one of the players recently sold for over $7,000. So, there's a whole market there for creating collectibles and player cards and, different promotional electronic assets to help promote the whole industry. And those items are all stored in their, electronic wallet that you download as part of the purchases that you make. So you have, luxury goods, you have memorabilia, sports memorabilia, also there's opportunities in the blockchain to do identity attestation. And I think, John is, works with the gambling entity, and one of the issues in the gambling industry for maintaining games, for online games, is how to identify whether or not the users are of age, and that's like a big problem plaguing the industry. So if the wallet, also has an identity attestation component that can verify who you are, how old you are, and verify your electronic assets, and so really I see this wallet in the future that will help maintain, all of your, electronic assets, your identity, and potentially your luxury goods, your physical assets. And something like this, in my space, also there's a lot of healthcare industry that is using the blockchain, so it could also have your medical records accessible through this wallet. So you have this wallet that manages pretty much like many components of who you are and what you own, and different aspects of your identity and your health. And this could all, to the extent that we can have some kind of integrated wallet across all industries, I think this would be a huge opportunity for, just in the gaming space, if they collaborated with other industries in order to really get some kind of industry standard in this space. And in the long term, I see that as an opportunity and something that's likely to happen.
So that sounds like a sort of a utopian scenario from a consumer standpoint. You have protection, you have consolidation, you have transferability, all on this singular, dissociated but singular network. Jonathan, I ask you, that seems like an amazing thing from a consumer standpoint. Would publishers on the esports space have any pushback to that? If I'm Riot, well, I've got my Riot points, and if I'm Blizzard, I've got my proprietary point system over here. Do you think that publishers would have any pushback? Would they be amenable to this universality of a wallet that allows players to sort of go back and forth transfer with a singular type of transaction?
So the danger to the publishers is that essentially every time we've had these technological advancements or changes in the way that consumers interact with each other, they've had to adapt. It wasn't too long ago that the idea of being able to play a free game was absolutely ridiculous to most of the industry. And it wasn't until Fortnite came along and just totally toppled and took over a huge chunk of their market that suddenly, oh my gosh, there's something here, we better pay attention. So blockchain, as Giovanna just alluded to, is certainly going to be a very disruptive technology to the publisher space if these big publishers don't find a way to be able to play with it in a way that's going to be acceptable to its users. Because at the end of the day, the users will find a way. and there will be platforms that will emerge, which will allow for everybody to connect with one another. And the great thing about blockchain technology is that it's immutable and that it's not easily controlled. It's a beast in itself, and it allows for the people to be able to exercise the power and the control to interact with one another in a way without third parties being able to stop them. And of course, this is what's given Bitcoin its value. And this is, of course, what would give users the capability to be able to trade with one another. We've seen it already in the gaming industry where they want to be able to trade in-game assets with one another. So they start to produce third-party sites to be able to do these kinds of things. Publishers really need to be able to find a way to be able to be amicable to the idea of being able to have a free market for how people are going to be able to take their identity as a gamer and be able to be portable with it, be able to have their in-game points from one world taken to another world and be able to carry that with them. Because frankly, I mean, every single gamer is investing time in these spaces. And if the publisher isn't willing to be able to allow that user to be able to actually hold the value of that time, which of course is what a blockchain does, is stamps time and be able to trace that value, then they're going to be left in the cold. And there's the games that actually provide that value to users, the users will go. And that's essentially what I believe is going to happen is, as we move forward in the industry and as gaming becomes much more a part of people's lives as the industrial age is ending and we see more and more people having more free time, gaming is increasing, and this is why we're seeing all these stats now. So.
And Marco, esports is interesting insofar as the professional scene grew without there being a strong amateur scene to feed it, which is the reverse of traditional sports. How do you see blockchain, for someone like you who sees an opportunity in the amateur side, impacting the amateur tournament level activity?
You know, I'm obviously, like everyone up here on this panel, a big believer in the technology behind blockchain and what the blockchain represents. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. My wife tells me I can't seem to ever get a regular job. I've started 3 companies and had 2 acquired. But being an entrepreneur, one of the things that I always look for is, I generally start by looking for a problem that exists that needs to be solved. And you look at a market and you say, okay, there's a problem here that people can't do X. I think there's a way we can allow them to be able to do that. We start to test it. If people start to like that and they want to achieve that, then we will build a company around that. We've done it a few times. The amateur esports space is still a bit of a wild space. There's multiple different organizations that some run high school esports, some run collegiate esports, some like Super League are not specific and they run just anything but professional esports. I'm not sure I can honestly say I've seen a problem just yet that blockchain solves for amateur esports at this time. There might be some things that blockchain improves on some level or makes better on some level, but I think until you present game publishers, which as you said, Khalid, earlier, really hold the majority of the cards here, the majority of the revenue is going to the game publishers, the majority of the strings are held by the publishers, until you can convince those publishers that there's an emerging problem that they need to jump on top of and be able to solve with blockchain, I don't think you're going to see too many of them make a concerted effort to start to integrate that and move their users over to it. Most game publishers are either publicly traded companies or owned by publicly traded companies. They're very revenue focused. If anything messes with their revenue even a stitch, they're not going to do it, right? So I think if they have their own currency, their players like their own the currency that they're using right now, and they don't see a problem, they're probably not going to try to fix that. But you know, I think as the amateur esports space and esports itself evolves and grows larger and needs to get more organized, and perhaps you have farm systems and you need to better authenticate what's taking place, because there's so many people that are playing games right now. I mean, I saw a stat recently, and I would caution everyone here, when you see esports stats, always read where they're referenced from and what they're saying. And if it doesn't pass the BS meter, it's probably because it's not accurate. There's a lot of inaccurate stuff, and there's accurate stuff. But one that I saw that was accurate, I think, recently, is that 70% of college-age individuals identify as gamers, right? That means 70% of kids in college consider themselves to be gamers. That's only going to continue to increase, and those collegiate age gamers are going to, get older and be my age at some point and still play games, and that's going to continue. And I think, what you're seeing is there's so many people that want to compete at an amateur level and want to have a chance to be a pro gamer or a chance to be able to compete at a high level, that there may come a time when we need to better and more accurately be able to track and represent who is doing what.
Kevin, I have a question for you with respect to this. A lot of what we see in a lot of industries, change happens not because the people who hold the chips create the change, but because consumers at the consumer level create the change, whether it be a flavor like New Coke failing when people said get rid of it, or whether it be features on a car that people want. Kevin, could this be something that's the same, where I've identified an issue in blockchain that could really help esports move forward from a player's perspective, but because there are certain monopolies and duopolies at the publisher level, that there may be some pushback? Could a groundswell from the college and collegiate folks, or 70% of them are gamers, could we see a groundswell from college-age amateur gamers saying this is something we really, really want from another number of different perspectives to help move this forward?
Yeah, I think in a number of areas, especially related to integrity and verifying identity. Not sure if many people heard about the NCAA rolling back their regulations in regards to amateur status and activity. So there's going to have to be some type of regulatory control to verify these actors that are helping to represent these, this new emerging talent. So I think blockchain has a usage in terms of confirming a particular history of a respected agent. Also, as it relates to data, as an esports player matriculates through their career, as a way to verify the data, to make sure if I'm recruiting a player that the stats are legitimate, and making sure that there's a one standard to measure that, because there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and to Marco's point, it's a Wild West. So if there is a unified system that could verify integrity, transactions, also as prize pools and gambling start to kind of emerge more prevalence in esports, verifying the source of the funds, that the funds actually exist, and also in terms of multinational transactions to ensure safe and secure transactions.
Very interesting. So, Giovanna, let me ask you this. We've identified the issue, we've identified some pushback, we've identified some possible solutions. What's the low-hanging fruit? Like right now in esports, what are players in esports missing today that you feel like could be implemented that would represent fairly low-hanging fruit for some positive benefits?
Well, in terms of the, just from not necessarily, the players, like from an intellectual property perspective, like we're talking about their identity, managing their identity on the blockchain and monetizing that. So in that perspective, that would definitely be an opportunity for them to have some kind of architecture, blockchain-based, that verifies who they are and tracks, just as Ken was talking about, that verifies their results of their games, and maybe they may have like associated memorabilia that can help promote them, and maybe provide a mechanism to bet on their success in a tournament or on a game that is being live streamed. And so there might be, just in terms of individual players, to be able to help monetize their own identity. And in terms of for operators and other, the gaming industry and the esports industry, I think that the blockchain provides a huge potential, at least from an intellectual property perspective, because is for patents, because there's so much IP to be had. This is, the blockchain is very much like the internet. When the internet first came out, in the 90s, it was, it was nothing like it is now, and it would be hard to appreciate what it's going to look like now. And it's the same sort of trajectory for blockchain. Blockchain is, still, this ambiguous structure for many people, but in the future, it's going to be the backbone of so much of our technology. And it's just, we're just at the tip of the iceberg for what we've got for the future here. So it's certainly, from an IP perspective, there's so many opportunities for entities, businesses in the space to make sure that they protect their intellectual property and protect their technology and look at it from a future with having a blockchain components and taking advantage of the benefits of blockchain.
Thank you. I want to transition a little bit from blockchain, which many of us may not have had a direct interaction with, to something that I think we've all had a direct interaction with, which is losing our money at a casino. Evidence suggests, John, that the casino game, slots in particular, that have the highest margin for brick and mortar casinos, that younger people are playing at a lower clip than their older counterparts, and many are seeing esports gaming as sort of a replacement for this lost revenue. Two-part question for you. A, how real is that? And B, sort of how serious is the casino industry taking this transition?
You're absolutely right. It's one of the biggest problems facing the industry right now is that the up-and-coming, the millennial market that is now starting to get their jobs and they start having disposable income isn't going to the casino to gamble anymore. And it's not that they're going online to gamble, they're just not gambling. They'll go to the casinos for the nightclubs, they'll go for the restaurants, but they won't go to spend their money and risk their money. They're just not entertained by reel spinning. Watching a machine just spin reels on the screen and hope they match some just doesn't do it for them. So we have a great relationship with the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, which is effectively the organization with the government that oversees all of the gambling within the state of New Jersey. And they've been begging us, as one of the only East Coast kind of slot manufacturers, to design skill-based games. And come up with new ideas. And the simple thing where a lot of people said, well, hey, take some slot machines, and in a bonus, put Frogger in. If you get all the way across the road in the Frogger round, then you get this bonus. But it just still wasn't doing it, because in order to get that, you had to spin it 200 times. So they start saying, yes, we're going to go into these things with esports. It is a big part of the conversation. Just last May, the Supreme Court obviously overturned the sports betting ban, which opened the door for esports as well. But the original law that New Jersey actually had, that was the basis of that entire lawsuit, actually prohibited electronic sports, the original version of it. The immediate backlash they got once the Supreme Court decision came through was that, no, these rules must allow it. But like anything the government does, they say, how do we balance the interests of what the industry wants versus the interests that we made, the promises we made to our voters. So what they did was the New Jersey rule, which currently stands and where other states are heading, which is unfortunate, is you can wager on a electronic sports tournament. However, not a single player in the tournament can be under the age of 18. And when you look at the statistics where the majority of the people watching this, the people engaging in it, the people who are going to pay attention that there actually is a tournament this weekend are typically going to be under 18 years old, or at least the majority of the market. When you get into situations where you might say, well, hey, let's just say one of the tournament hosts wants to make the tournament 18 and over, but the first 3 rounds of this tournament are actually going to be home-based playing and logging in. If I'm, as a parent, I've got 3 little kids, and my son, as soon as that kid won so many millions of dollars, I went out and bought my 7-year-old Fortnite. He's got to get good at it. I'm looking at these tournaments and saying how it would be easy for me to say, hey, it's a $10 entry fee. I'm just going to log in and just say it's me. But I'm going to let him play. And what if he just makes it? Now he's going to show up to the next tier as a young kid and can't be in this tournament. The government is so concerned on how they're going to be able to protect things, not realizing that it's perhaps not the problem who the player is. It's the problem really remains on the side of who's doing the wagering, who's doing the gambling. And I don't think we have a concern of, it's no different whether it's a slot machine online or a poker game online or esports you're betting on. The real focus and targeted concern of the government is developing a product that millennials want so they can get their tax revenue, but at the same time protecting against it. And once you throw the term minor around, they're going to say anything related to gambling, anything that has to do with minors, forget it. It's one of the reasons why every state has prohibition on high school sports. You can't wager on that. So if you can't wager on high school sports, why would you allow wagering on high school players playing an electronic sport? And that's the rationale that they came out behind the law. But then the problem is how do we get around that?
Well, I've got a question about that, and Kevin, maybe you can help out. It seems, at least to me, laws like that and are fashioned in such a way to prevent esports from being considered within the penumbra of what's legal sports gambling are a little bit hypocritical, considering if you track back to 1996, you have a 17-year-old Kobe Bryant playing in professional games. Basketball season, college is about to start, and we will have lots of young freshmen who are under the age of 18, and those games are legal to be wagered upon. Certainly someone like a Tiger Woods, when he was in college, had the skill to be professional and wound up leaving early. Kevin, do you see some sort of just prejudice against esports based on not necessarily because they do understand, but simply because they do not understand the analogs?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to relate to the narrative of esports. People look at esports players as these fringe actors that are munching Doritos and drinking Red Bull in basements. But it's really a standard industry now that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And studies show that 60% of college esports players are all STEM majors. There's a high degree of technology. There's a lot of socialization skills. There's data, there's analytics. All the jobs that you'll find in the professional sports industry, in marketing and business development, all exist within esports. And there's no physical limitations. So someone like me who wasn't able to make the basketball, football, or any team for that matter, I could still be competitive. And it also relates to disabled students that want to play. So I think in terms of inclusion and things like that, there's really a narrative that has to change so people understand that esports is a viable industry. And as it relates to gambling, I'm a firm advocate that we should take the Adam Silver approach, the NBA commissioner. He knows that gambling is going to happen, so he's taking steps to make sure that it's regulated properly and it's monetized properly, effectively through the leagues, through the unions. And I think college esports needs to take a playbook from the NBA and begin to regulate it and treat it like the national lottery. A lot of these college programs are underfunded. They all need technology. They need uniforms. The athletic programs do not want to give up their budgets. So why not find a way to keep the gambling revenue from going to the Cayman Islands and offshore and regulate it just like the state lottery? A lot of state lotteries fund educational infrastructure in the state of Massachusetts. So why can't we do that with esports? Using blockchain technology, it's easier to manage this type of activity using all this cutting edge technology. AI can identify any trends related to cheating activity. There's no better way to regulate, and John and I talked about this, there's no better way to regulate cheating, any type of malicious software or anything like that. And the other part about esports that a lot of people seem to really underestimate is it's really self-regulated. To be branded as a cheater in esports, it's worse than having a scarlet letter back in the 1600s. There was a kid at the Fortnite tournament that was caught cheating, and every time they showed him on the screen, he was harassed and booed. He was harassed online. So it's a big integrity thing. When you think about the NFL, guys getting suspended for PEDs, they get a pat on the back. It doesn't apply for baseball, but in terms of esports, again, the technology manages and regulates it, and the community self-regulates to make sure that none of that stuff really happens, and cheaters are banned. So I think there is a stigma, and it all has to change with the narrative.
Yeah, and I think about that question. I think what would happen to, for example, betting activity on women's tennis if the rule was that you couldn't be under 18. You'd lose a lot of that great activity there. Let me ask you this question back to you, John. Do you think, and I think the answer is eventually yes, but what do you think the immediate steps are to sort of reversing this? It's clear that communities and countries in Europe have no such similar stigma on betting in esports. It's alive, it's well as prevalent. It's a very established ecosystem there. What do you think it takes to get that here?
I think it's like anything else. How ridiculous is it that we just, in 2018, finally overturned a ban that Nevada was the only state that allowed sports betting? We allow every other type of gambling in the state, but we don't allow, you can't wager on a professional sport. You can with your bookie, we're not going to bother you, but just don't do it where it's going to be taxed. Like anything else, and I'm an IP attorney by trade, as a patent attorney, and one of my first mentors always said, you're going to learn that the government lags technology by 10 years, always. One of the biggest problems the government's having right now, we have our content online, you can gamble on it in the state of New Jersey. We have servers, physical servers, in a vault in Caesars Casino in Atlantic City, because that's where it has to be. They need it physically tied there. All the critical components need to be locally there, because they honestly believe that, hey, if we need to shut you down, we can go over and unpull the plug. So you start getting into anything that's based on, oh, wait a second, if the entire environment is now hosted online and the entire entire activity that we're actually trying to monitor can be manipulated with ones and zeros. Regulators and the government, they're petrified of it. So you have a whole bunch of basically 60, 70-year-old bureaucrats who don't understand the technology. Things like blockchain, which actually would give the government, if they understood it, it would give them the satisfaction of the security they're looking for, the lack of inability to cheat, the inability to basically, making hacking that much harder. I mean, I don't know why they don't think it would be that much harder to hack a server in Atlantic City than it would be to get through a blockchain. But it scares them. And I think if they can't say that they understand it, they have to say that we can't do it. I think especially when it comes to people gambling, because they feel all they have to do is basically take a step back and say, well, wait a second, if I don't understand it, to say that I'm comfortable that the people of this state won't be cheated out of their money, then how am I going to do that? The other thing, and this comes from our company's about to launch a casino out of Malta, about 16 territories to start all throughout Europe. And one of the things we're going through is working with certain sportsbook platforms that have things, and some of them we're talking to do offer esports products, doing the betting lines. It's one thing to say there's a pool, and it's one thing to say, hey, if we are going to put $10 in, the winner gets it. How do I, as a person who's saying, I'm interested, I want to get involved, what are the odds? And it can't just be linear odds, because you're going to get these professional people who've been doing it for 15 years versus someone's first year professionally. Obviously, you take a look at the NFL, that is the best line makers in the world are in Las Vegas for the NFL, and it's unbelievable how accurate they actually are right near the end of a game. But how do you do that in esports? And I think that before casinos will actually be comfortable even offering that product, they need to know they're not just going to be raked over the coals with people who actually know the market way better than they do.
Way more sharps in esports than there are in every other sport,
exactly.
Just because of the disparity in knowledge and information.
Yeah, so but the regulatory chill is just, going to hold it back from becoming a more
That's right, and so none of the companies, none of the casino operators are going to invest the money in technology and saying, hey, let's build all this out, because the regulators are saying, well, we need to see it before we can approve it. And everyone's saying, well, we're not going to spend the money and build it until we know you're actually going to accept the concept. That's kind of where it is at a stalemate. I was at a conference actually just last February in London, and this whole blockchain concept of delivering content for any type of casino product. And things people are talking about, the wallets and the security that goes around and how easily accessible, and you can put geofencing around it. You can put the territorial restrictions you need to have. But at the same time, the regulators are saying, hey, someone build us what the model would look like. Show us it works in a test environment. People are saying, we're not going to dump tens of millions of dollars into building out rebuilding our entire infrastructure just so you can say maybe. And that's kind of where we're at a stalemate. I think Europe's going to go first, and I mean, they're already doing the esports, basic esports stuff. They're not getting as complex as it could be. But.
I was told by someone who works in one of the daily fantasy companies that during these negotiations, particularly with New Jersey, when these laws are being constructed, that they opined that the reason why esports was excluded because they didn't have anybody in the room lobbying for esports, or the NFL, NBA, daily fantasy, they all had lobbyists in the room. And I said, well, that's because people, I think, still view esports as a monolith. It's not. We have various, the NFL and the NBA and the NHL didn't all go together. They had their own. And so Riot and Blizzard and Nintendo, et cetera, are seen more separately. Do you think that if there was a more unified lobbying front, a more unified position, and not these archipelagos in esports, that did have fare better in the legislative process?
So I think one of the reasons why a lot of these lobbyists, especially in New Jersey, I mean, the Atlantic City lobbyists are unbelievable. And when they want something done, it gets done. But one of the things they have to do is basically say
legally,
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Well, Atlantic City lobbyists. I don't know if lobbyist was a code word.
Well,
okay.
We can't talk about it. It's if you want something done, you have to lobby. You have to lobby. But a lot of the times people are lobbying because they're going to show where there's going to be increased operator value, increased casino value. I think one of the things they're going to have a hard time doing is selling that the traditional casino gambling audience, which in Atlantic City is basically men and women between 40 and 60, are basically going to come to casinos or go online to the online casinos and spend money wagering on esports. And I think that's, and maybe it's going to take this next wave of a generation. I mean, I played Madden, through college and still play it to this day. Now it's great teaching my kids how to play, games. So I actually appreciate it, but at the same time, I don't know that if a gambling audience is the same audience that is going on Twitch and watching these videos and is so into it that they're actually going to say it's going to increase viewership. That, where is the commercial value from the actual publisher side or from the tournament host side? on actually getting people gambling. Typically, I mean, why the NFL was kind of stupid to kind of be so resistant is it actually, people watch games when they're betting on them. It might be a game you're not interested in, but if you've got $50 on it, you're gonna watch it. And I think they're waiting to see where that's gonna play out.
Yeah.
Mark? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, one of the things that the internet benefited from was like the lack of regulation, and so that was really, it enabled it to work to grow to its potential. And like, with blockchain, you know, the casinos in Vegas, for example, you know, many of them got together to try to do a wagering system with Unicorn, and you know, the regulatory chill on that has been problematic, and so. We don't want to be, you know, for the U.S. to be left behind in this space. I mean, Europe is already, you know, way ahead in terms of the regulations that they've developed to certify operators in this space. And then in Malta, it's a super ripe place to go. And, you know, at least with New Jersey and Nevada, there is some movement there, but it's still not moving, appreciating the technology and the advantages of it and using it to leverage, to make sure that the casino industries are not going to be like a dying market where, you know, they are losing, you know, an important demographic. You know, millennials don't want to go there. And they've been using, you know, esports as a way to bait more of the millennials to come in. But the lack of being able to create a wagering system that goes along with that to monetize it has been unfortunate.
So we see sort of from a regulatory environment, history dictates that rules ease, things liberalize, whether it be from social constructs such as marijuana legalization to things like esports betting. So Mark, let's assume the world that will be. We don't know when it will be. Let's assume the world that will be when esports is fully available to have wagering. Do you think that impacts the amateur space, and if so, how?
You know, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, you know, I have a 10-year-old. I mean, watching kids grow up these days that play games, they have different behaviors or things that are important to them than I think people that maybe grew up in our generation have had. I think there's a lesser inclination to want to do things like gambling, from what I'm seeing from the younger demographic. I think there's been a lot of companies so far that have put out very comprehensive, well-developed gambling products for esports and gaming out there, but none of them have really knocked out of the park yet. I think probably one of the main reasons for that is they're spending all their time trying to convince gamers that they should go gamble, and the gamers are kind of like, I just want to play Fortnite. I don't really want to gamble. I just want to have fun with my friends and be social and watch a Marshmello concert. When maybe what they should be trying to do is explain what esports and gaming is to people that do like to gamble, that are older, that maybe it's a little bit more effort to bring them in, but you're probably going to have more success bringing that audience who actively is willing to wager and bet and buy into that lifestyle or type of action than you would for amateur esports. But you know, the amateur space, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to see the NCAA, you know, I'll kind of go on a limb yet right now, maybe bring it back to me if I'm wrong. I don't think esports needs the NCAA. And I don't think you'll probably ever see the NCAA find a way to get comfortable with esports as it is right now. Esports, again, is multiple game publishers, teams all over not just the country, all over the world, players all over the world, a younger average demographic. Average age of retirement for an esports player is like 24 years old, right? So you're talking about a really short career length of people. If you're 18 to 24, you play 6 years, that's like Tom Brady in the NFL playing 20 years, right? So it's a unique space that is still, you know, again, this is where I feel like, much like VR or AR, amazing tech, sometimes a little bit early. We haven't really seen the problem yet that exists. Doesn't mean it won't happen in a few years from now, but I think that, you know, right now I don't see it.
Please, Ken.
Yeah, we have theaters in the UK, and we have a deal with Unicorn. We're also invested in Unicorn, and we've been doing esports betting with League of Legends. And it's starting to pick up. It's not explosive, but it is starting to pick up. So we're looking at the US and as well as our foreign territories for in-theater, in cinema, and we're starting to see some activity.
I'm fascinated by this question of what the casino of the future will look like. You know, in 50 years, a lot of your slot pulling patrons, they'll be in the ground. and you'll have 50-year-olds who are today's hardcore gamers. So assuredly, and I'm fascinated by this because you brought this sort of chicken and the egg scenario where people don't want to invest until it's proven, and then the regulatory environment doesn't understand it, but all the while, year over year, our gamers are getting older and older into the age where people really care about their wallets. So what does the casino of the future look like in that respect, and when do you think that fulcrum happens?
So one of the things that we're already seeing, I was just at the biggest land-based US trade show was just in Vegas 2 weeks ago. And you know, everyone's always talking about what comes next, because people are saying, hey, these giant machines. I mean, the machines seem to be getting bigger and bigger and taller. We're almost hitting casino ceilings now. And you know, the bright lights, they take up more floor space, but they don't make any more money for the casino. You know, there are some companies, and we're actually one of them, who are out there pushing basically, we honestly believe this casino future is going to be just basically LED screens, and it's whatever you want on it. It's going to be loaded, it's all server-based or cloud-based. You're going to be within, you know, as long as you're within the resort property, you know, use your mobile, use a tablet. You know, here you're going to be on tablets. They're not going to be so concerned about the people who actually just want to be engaged with a mundane screen, you know, making bets. Just like a sports book, you know, if people really want to go to a sports book, you look, it used to be, you know, you go to the big ones in Vegas and they've got hundreds and hundreds of chairs in there so everyone can watch the event at once. You go to some of the new ones, especially over in Europe, if you see any of the new casinos that they put out, you know, their sports books, you walk in, maybe it has a bar, you know, maybe that's about it. But people are in and out. They want to gamble and then do something else. People don't want to sit around and pump quarters into a machine anymore. So I think you're going to start seeing what the European model is. And if anyone who's been to any of the casinos in London, it's a perfect example. Very small square footage, but it's basically going to have everything you want to do. It gets your players, gets your bets in, and then you'll be entertained. And I think that's pretty much where the land-based casino space is going to head.
I tend to disagree with that.
Disagree. Fight now.
So we're talking 50 years from now, so I don't think we'll have tablets. We'll have VR. It'll be virtual reality that really dominates the play field. Casinos as they are today will basically completely transform. They're not going to be known as casinos anymore. They're going to be more like entertainment centers. You're essentially going to go there. You're going to be there specifically to be able to take on challenges and being able to interact with one another. And the only kind of gambling that's going to take place is people betting on the outcomes of these challenges. So think gladiators, I guess, is an easy way to think about it. I'm not saying that people are going to kill each other, but essentially the idea of being able to see challenges happening and being able to have skill-based challenges between players taking place. And these will be like gaming meccas to allow for these people who are playing in virtual reality worlds, who become skilled in their own right, to be able to go to these places, get together, and be able to really challenge one another and meet face to face in, you know, true social form. But of course, as far as the gaming aspect is concerned, the only real gaming that's going to happen is people predicting the outcomes. So it's all going to be about prediction. It's not really going to be about random events and things like that. I think the flavor for that, or the entertainment for that, has really passed away. That's a thing of the past generations, which were entertained by that. But today, I think the flavor 50 years from now that we're talking about is much more sophisticated and much more advanced. And I believe that that's the kind of future you're going to see in casino spaces, is really, it's all about the challenge and it's all about the engagement.
Well, also, just from the analytics are going to be very important,
Through
I
the
think,
roof.
because
Yeah.
everything's going to be customized to, you know, the individual that is playing the games or playing the challenges or doing whatever they're doing. So there'll be, you know, all of their behavior will be, you know, tracked, and, you know, every drink, whether they order, you know, a cocktail or a monster drink, I mean, it will be, you know, custom designed. Like there may be, you know, an emoji that appears, like follows them around from, you know, their avatar, you know, will appear on the, you know, the virtual displays whenever they're near and whatever they're playing, and there'll be some kind of, you know, virtual representation of them and a customized experience based on, you know, based on their behavior that's been tracked.
So you think the Minority Report's going to happen, basically? Just like
Well, I don't know.
everywhere you went, there was like something tracking you about what you wanted.
Well, I think
right?
in the
Yeah,
casino, you know,
yeah.
We're already doing all that. We're already doing all that.
Not far away from it. I actually read a newspaper article today that Kyrie Irving, you guys remember him, right? Okay. Yeah, Kyrie Irving refused to wear the biometric tracking in practice, and that was a big sting. I want to take the last 10 minutes and go down the line to each of you, and the question is essentially, what if you had a magic wand to wave with respect to some of the things we're talking about, or things that you're passionate about, or particularly apropos for what you're doing in the space, and you can make it so, what would you make so that does not currently exist that you think should?
I gotta go first, don't I?
You don't have to. I know Kevin's got a lot of things he wishes he could make happen right now if he could.
Let's give you the floor.
I think for me, it's player advocacy. I would love to see, high school players matriculate into college and professional ranks, but also have the same focus on career development, so that, when their careers end early or what have you, that they understand business development and good investment, and being able to handle being a good father and being a good citizen of the world. Because I think there's when you look at the NCAA and what they've done in terms of extracting, monetization and value, but they really haven't given back to the individual players. So I'm hoping with esports that we can reset the landscape and be able to identify early on ways to incorporate player development, career development, and teach these athletes how to build careers. So in the case of their career ending early, they're able to create a sustainable lifestyle.
Marco, before you go, I want to underscore that particular point, especially for the esport athlete, If you take two kids, they're both 10, 11 years old, and I told you that one spends 10 hours of his day playing games, and I told you that the other spent 10 hours of his day playing chess, you look at the chess playing kid and go, oh my goodness, he's going to go someplace. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't grow up to be Kasparov, there are no chess jobs. But if you don't grow up to be Faker in esports, if you've been to any esports arena, facility, publisher, you can be a game developer, you can be a camera operator, you can be a computer scientist, you can be a coach, an assist. There are a full panoply of jobs in esports, which include now gaming and blockchain to be added to that, that these kids can avail themselves of if they don't go onto the professional ranks. So I think that's an especially important point about how you teach these kids in an early stage that what they're doing is not idle, but it's purposeful. Marco.
If I had a magic wand and I could do anything I wanted, I'd like to see better revenue diversification in esports, right? I'd like to find some way to take the reins away from the major publishers a little bit, allow more competition in terms of who would be running events and how those events would be run. I think you're seeing that a little bit in some degree now, because it's not just about the big two anymore. You're starting to see other game publishers now that have games that become popular, that have their own esports leagues. Not everybody is looking to run their own league itself, and they're willing to allow other organizations or the teams to run events. Super League Gaming runs Fortnite tournaments that have anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 in prize pool money right now, right? So we run, but we also run, League of Legends events, which are much more restrictive because of our, our relationship with Riot, right? But, Epic is a little bit more forthcoming with that. Valve with CSGO and Dota 2 don't want any interest in running their own events. They're much more interested in allowing other organizations to run those. And what you see happens with prize pools and things like Dota 2, when you have the ability for fans and audiences to match those prize pools rise significantly, right? So,
You think you ever see the day where we see a truly crowdsourced AAA title crop up?
Crowdsourced like prize pool or
AAA title, like something that could rival a League of Legends or Fortnite,
yeah.
That's completely owned by the consumers.
I don't think you will, because I think if it's that good, it'll get bought, right? I mean, EA, Blizzard, Riot, they have shown a propensity to, hey, these guys are making something really good over here. Let's buy that 5 years before it's ever going to come out, and we'll have them make that game for us, right?
Obsolescence, I got it.
Yeah.
Giovanna?
Oh, well, just along those lines, so you definitely could have something like that on a public blockchain that could be crowdsourced, that could survive on its own, like a Bitcoin. But, so that's definitely a good use case for making something like that happen. Maybe your next company.
You're into getting stuff acquired. So.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, but for my magic wand, I mean, number one, it would definitely be to stop the regulatory chill on with blockchain technologies and tokenizing and crypto and allowing that space to evolve and work to its potential, as well as for the gaming industry and to really allow for in-app purchases and skins and all electronic assets that you purchase in games to be easily transferred in terms of ownership to other players, and to have that kind of freedom of interoperability for all electronic assets within games. So I think that would definitely, sort of galvanize the environment and make it even more popular to the extent that they could enable something like that. And blockchain, I think, is a perfect technology that would make that happen.
I think, my final points would be just, the government's always going to lag behind, and people just have to get used to accepting that. From a gambling perspective, it will come. Everything Europe's done in terms of between online gambling and just what they allow to happen, we always seem to be at least 10 years behind them. In the world of government regulation, bring up a point is we can talk about things that they're prohibiting from a gambling perspective or third-party wager on these events. My fear for the industry is going to be if it continues to grow the path it will, and I think we all believe it is going to keep growing, that the government basically starts to overregulate. The government starts to crack down on in-game bartering. They identify those as taxable events. There's so many things the government could do to actually destroy the industry just because they can get a few more tax dollars out of it. And that's the big takeaway is hopefully everyone keeps the government at bay. It's one thing if they're not allowing us to gamble on it, but a whole other thing would be as if they actually deterred the growth of the sports just due to the fact they could continue to regulate it.
So I believe if I had my magic wand and I could ask for one thing, it would be for essentially recognizing that we live in one world now, and that we have to allow for communities to be able to live autonomously within those communities, regardless of where they're geographically located. I think that that's going to come about in a way that most governments today don't see happening. The threat of Bitcoin is threatening their money supplies, their dollars. The gaming industry, the same thing is going to happen, but it's going to come in a way that's actually going to provide better usefulness for the end user. That's what Bitcoin has done for so many countries, and I think that if I had my magic wand, I'd see that day come sooner than later, but it will come.
Well, thank you. I would like to thank Jonathan, John, Giovanna, Marco, and Kevin, and also the MIT Enterprise Forum for having us. We're moving to the audience portion of the show. Anyone who has a question, we have a microphone down here that you're very welcome to line up and ask questions to. And there's also, I believe, someone, yeah, there he is. He's raising the microphone over there. And if anyone has questions, please.
Hi, thank you everyone for the very interesting talk. I have a question for Ms. Fessenden. And we've been talking a lot about how blockchain can bring two important things that we mentioned. First one is integrity. So one of the first problems that we see now is that, especially in the skin industry, we can never really be sure if when one company is selling one skin, there is always one skin in circulation, and blockchain solves this problem. And another problem that has been just mentioned is about having a global circulation of these digital assets. And to make these two very important things happen, we need one thing in common, which is open source. And how are these companies positioning towards open source and open standards when we are still talking a lot about intellectual property? Because if we have intellectual property that can be used only from one company, automatically we lose integrity and interoperability between other companies and other systems. I want to know what is like the take on the industry now.
Right, so that's a great question. Just to make sure I understand you're asking about, how is there like sort of, how do you have open source public blockchains and also maintain IP protection? Is that what? Okay, so that's a great question, and it's often something that I encounter. So there's definitely, open source is software, and open source blockchains are really important for the ecosystem. And open source technology in general is like vital to our technological development, and it is just one component as part of like your intellectual property. So definitely open source licensing is, you can have a happy marriage with having license to a blockchain or even your own private blockchain, whether it's a public one that's open sourced or even your own private one. You can open source the code and license it in that way and still have a healthy patent portfolio, a thriving intellectual property portfolio. Because really in many cases, depending on like the open source license you use, but if it's like the GPL, depending on which version of the GPL, you can still maintain your intellectual property rights, at least in other implementations. So the open source license bit would be for that particular code, but a good patent application would cover many different implementations, not just that specific implementation that's been represented in the software code. So a patent application would cover the general idea, and it the very specific implementation that's been represented in the blockchain code is just one example implementation that would be protected, that would be freely licensed from the patent, but the patent would cover additional things that were not necessarily that were broader than what was being licensed in the open source blockchain. And so I think that that it's a great strategy to have an open source portfolio as part of your general intellectual property portfolio for a software company. There's a lot of good, it can help increase your market share, it can help increase the interoperability with your technology, and so you can open source certain portions of your technology while at the same time maintaining patents and copyrights on other bits that or other aspects of your technology. So you can do both. They work together very well.
I could actually provide an example that's happened in the industry recently. I'm sure many of you, if you're following blockchain, you probably know EOS. So Dan Larimer, who is the creator of EOS, is a good friend of mine, and and now he's working with Block One, and they recently actually released a patent in regards to decentralized identification, which is quite exciting. I know that he's talked about that for a really long time, and it's a big challenge within blockchain, and they've created a whole mechanism for it. And of course, because it's Block One and because of their interest in EOS.io, they're going to release that open source, and they're going to release that publicly. But of course, they will have the patent likely to be able to facilitate other instances of having it work with companies that want to be able to utilize that same technology and have requirements for being able to be able to say that they are okay with being able to use this particular piece of software. So it's already happened. That's just one example of how they can work side by side. I'm very, like, the patent itself is out there, but it's still going to be open source software that's going to be used within EOS.io, and everybody will be able to use it without issue. It's almost like, and Dan Larimer has said this on a number of occasions, it's a matter of if you trust the benevolent dictator who owns it. So he's admitted on occasion that you need to have a benevolent dictator within a decentralized system, depending on where they're located. But that's his own type of theory.
Yeah, and just an example, Red Hat, for example, has thousands of patents, and they certainly, have open source technology. They're a huge open source player, Linux. So. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Open source is just absolutely, I don't understand why anybody is trying to do private software today. It's insecure, it doesn't make sense. Open source just has so many more advantages, and if companies don't see that today, I don't know what they're doing in this space, so.
Given the vast audience for esports, I'm curious about the panel's response to why there's been such a lukewarm reaction to gambling on esports. I mean, I know, for example, that in Nevada, there was one particular commercial property that took a pretty strong run at making esports a viable concern, ran some tournaments, and retrofit a whole room to try and get it. And Nevada actually allows for esports competitions if you go and get permission from their gaming regulators. And after that, it was pretty much crickets. There was no momentum. They went nowhere with gambling on it. Yet you had this huge audience. So it's kind of like, this might be asking, like, how do you monetize the industry? But what do you think, why there was such a sort of tepid reaction to trying to gamble on esports?
Probably a number of us have some opinions on that. Go ahead, Kev.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I think it's really a narrative thing because if you look at like Super Smash, for example, it's customary for when there are live tournaments, you pay $10 to get in, you put $10 in the prize pool. And generally, the prize pool, there's a platform called Smash GG where there are players that, you could call them bounty hunters or mercenaries, that will look around the country for the biggest prize pools, and then they'll fly in and try to win it. So I don't think it's within the community, I think it's more the narrative, and I think that it depends on the publisher. As we talked about, some have a really tight grip on, they don't want anything to be associated, Nintendo's another one, that anything that's subversive in terms of the culture and anything negative, they don't want to be associated with it. With Smash, initially, it wasn't regulated at all, except for by the players. So all this stuff kind of happened and it's become customary. So I think there's really a narrative issue, and I think some of it has to do with regulatory concerns.
Yeah, I think another one of the reasons too is this, and John alluded to it, is that the casino industry hasn't really wrapped their brains around how esports actually works. I'm familiar with the example that you cite, and it's very land-based, like everything happens there. Well, and to bet on it, you had to be there. Well, that's just not, like, you know, in music, this is like a phrase like, that's not hip hop. Like, that's not very esports, right? Like, the whole idea that you have to be at the place where the gambling takes place and the tournament takes place to take part in it, that's sort of anathema to the very culture. Now, if you could be anywhere and watch that tournament and gamble on it, and there were reliable lines set on it, which all this will be in the future. Now, I applaud them because they took a run at something today, which that model may not be ripe for another decade or so, but I think that's an example of someone being ahead of their time rather than something being the wrong model or not working.
I think, just to add to the last thing you just said, you know, if you actually look at a traditional sports book where, you know, you're talking about sports that have been around for 50, 60 years, or people have been betting on them in Nevada, if you look at the margins that the casino actually makes on those, they're very small, you know, they're minuscule. Obviously, there's a lot of, even with, like, you know, the Super Bowl, there's a ton of action on it. The casinos make a very small margin, that's why the lines keep moving. When they don't understand the sport, when they don't understand how to set those lines, I mean, they're setting themselves up for a bloodbath. You know, they're gonna have to try to keep up and shift things until they're comfortable with the fact that they're gonna know how they can give the customers what they want. And I do believe that, yes, people wanna actually wager on this stuff. I think that audience will continue to grow. But until they're comfortable that they're gonna not lose money on it and they're gonna build that margin in, they're gonna say it's not worth it for them.
And I think another thing to add on top of that, that adds just towards not only that example, but gambling and esports in general, particularly in the fighting game community. These are mostly fighting game tournaments. They aren't like these MOBA competitions, is right now there's no one unifying league. And so in this particular instance, a tournament comes in, you can have this mercenary come in and just wreck the whole tournament. And then the next week, the kid who finished third place that week might not even place in the top 16 the next week, and there's no consistency. So I think the onus is a little bit on esports as well to create, at least in the fighting game community, here's a league, and here are the same 40 players who are going to play week after week, so you can start to develop this long lineage of results that people can make adequate lines on to say, okay, well, this guy, Sonic Fox, is definitely better than To Kill Sage, and in this quantity, and so that bettors can have a more consistency about the outcomes. Right now, the outcomes are inconsistent for the large part, but that's because the participants from tournament to tournament tend to be inconsistent as well.
Yeah, they could benefit from like a PGA or even a NASCAR type of a circuit. So
100%.
there is a lot of room for growth in terms of standardization. I think that's yet to come.
I tend to agree with what you just said in regards to just there's not enough data, and the people who are looking to bet, they don't know what they're betting on. They're looking on a screen, they're just like, okay, there's these two guys, and okay, this guy looks good. You know, they don't follow them like the 15-year-olds are following these players, and like they have these huge followings all over the world that watch them day and night and know everything about them because they've been part of their lives for so long. And so those fans aren't the ones that are actually engaging in going to this place to place their bets. What they're doing is they're engaging in the streams where everybody is like interacting, they're engaging, and they're able to actually reach out and actually talk to the guy that they're totally like loving. And that's the type of, like, that's the kind of activity that's got everybody so excited. That's why all the viewership is going away from Netflix and going to this. So because there's that engagement, if they want to be able to bet on something, they're going to put $5 up so they can see their name flash up on the screen. They're not going to put $5 on if you're going to win. Or what's going to happen is it's happening there in the game where the people are putting up that and that's kind of their sort of way of betting, but they're not really going to win anything except for the cred, right? And to them, social credence is much more valuable than a win. So that whole generation doesn't care about that type of betting, and the older generation doesn't understand what they're betting on, so they don't want to get engaged. So that's what I think is happening now with these outfits that are trying to get into the esports space and get into the betting space. They're facing this building things for a market that doesn't even understand or able to use it. So I think you're going to see as we move forward. You just got to wait another 5 years because those 15-year-olds are going to be the ones that actually know who these players are, and then they're going to actually start to engage in places, maybe places like that. But my bet is that it's not going to be in places like that it happens. It's all going to be in the streams, and it's all going to be in tools that are right in front of them to make it so that it's going to be a blockchain, and that's going to allow them to transact instantly, securely, and right there and then win instantly. And then the government could get a little piece of tax out of that transaction without anybody having to be bothered, right? Hopefully, if the government does that, we can save billions of dollars in tax, in wasted administration. So government, get on it. Like, let's use it.
Gotcha. Oh, you're just holding the microphone. You sparked a lot. We had a lot to say about that.
Do you guys think that perhaps some of the lukewarm response to gambling had to do with some of the match-fixing scandals that have happened in the past? StarCraft had one with Life in 2015, I think, and then Counter-Strike has had some issues as well with several players still being banned.
Can you repeat that?
He was asking whether the question was whether or not some of the lukewarm response to esports gambling is based on match-fixing scandals.
I don't think so.
Well, you go back to the late '90s. I mean, predating all the people playing games today, but late '90s, you had all the poker sites popping up everywhere. The biggest problem that they had, I mean, obviously there was a taxation issue, but everyone was like, oh, well, we'll pay our taxes U.S. We have no problem with that. But then, one of the things that no one could actually prevent was the fact that you would get 5 guys in the same room, jump on a table of 6 people, and the 5 of them would be teaming up against one poker player. And they just couldn't stop that. And that was, it's effectively fraud in the gambling world. And so government's like, until you can prevent that, you have to shut down. I think once you have a scandal like that, what it does is it creates, again, take an audience that doesn't necessarily understand technology as well as anybody in this room. And so you're taking these people who are saying, sure, I'll put $100 in a match, it looks fun, but I don't know what I'm doing. And then you hear a story about, well, wait a second, and these guys throw matches for each other, and so the other one can win, and that's going to obviously be just another deterrent. No different than if you heard that somebody was fixing horse races, you wouldn't be going to the track.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the flip side to that is that anything that happens, esports is still pretty nascent, and so things that happen in esports they do get magnified. Like, oh, match fixing in esports. Does anyone heard of Tim Donaghy in basketball? And there's like 6 years ago, it's a referee who was fixing games in basketball, and then here we are today with the NBA having an official gaming partner in MGM. Or anyone heard of the Chicago Black Sox? I mean, sports equals gambling. Like, sports plus gambling equals scandal at some point in time. There is some knowable coefficient that there will be some sort of gambling, or UNLV in the night. And it goes on and on and on throughout every sport. I think esports is young enough for where the impact can be slightly modified, but I think that over the course of the time, even that'll be negligible, and you'll say, okay, well, it's a sport, and so this is going to happen. How do we mitigate it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the existing sports have been very successful in being able to mitigate that. But I also think it is a big problem right now, according to regulators who are watching the esports space. I attend various conferences throughout the year, and as far for feedback I'm hearing from regulators who actually see it all and actually receive the reports on various instances, they get reports more so in esports than anything else. Now, you could say, oh my God, the problem in esports is so much bigger than sports. But I think that is nascent to what we're seeing with the statistics of how everything is moving to esports and the viewership and everything and all the attention is getting on esports and not so much on sports anymore, and nobody's watching sports anymore. So you don't have everybody paying too much attention there. Meanwhile, everyone's paying attention here, so there's so much more info that's popping up. Now, the truth is regulators are doing nothing about it because they just don't have any framework for it. It's just information to them now. And so far, they haven't seen anything that has, like, from what, and again, I'm speaking from what I've heard from regulators speaking at these conferences. You know, they're saying that they're getting info hits, but they're not seeing anything that's been like absolutely like red flag, you know, crazy. So they haven't been like peering into and investigating deeper into these types of things yet. So my feeling is that we're seeing more of these, and the great thing about it is that it's all online, it's all easy to see, and we probably know more about it because of that. And so that the fact that it's going to be easier to get caught, just like, you know, a long time ago, people thought Bitcoin was anonymous and they could do all kinds of things. Now they realize if you use Bitcoin to try to do something bad, you're going to get caught. Right? It's easier to get caught. And so with online esports, you're going to see the same thing happening, where eventually everyone who plays it realizes, look, you're going to get caught in this space easier than anything else, so don't do it.
Yeah. And I think, just to add to that also, if you're playing through a client, if it's Riot, and you get caught cheating, they have a higher degree of measurement to be able to tell, and the consequences are far greater because you're going to get banned for life or what have you. So I do think that, between that and the self-policing of the community and the shaming, so to speak, helps as well. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question if someone has one out there.
We got live streamers that I got.
I want to get a better understanding how blockchain could be used on one-on-one gambling. So if you have a player who wants to bet against his friend in a game rather than betting on a team or something like that, does blockchain allow you to have that kind of interaction without fees associated with it? So if I bet my friend $5, I make $5 or something close to that? Or are there fees that are always going to be associated with financial transactions?
So it all depends on the blockchain platform they're using. For example, if you're going to use something like EOS, which uses a stake-based type of throttling system, you wouldn't see any kind of fees. But then you're going to have to buy EOS in order to be able to use the network, right? So that's the downside. Aside from that, there are networks that are out there that do charge a fee for that, but it's so small. Most people, because it provides so much value for something like that, that it doesn't bother them so much. Now, in networks that most people are aware of, where smart contracts run, is mostly mostly Ethereum. And in that case, we've seen where the fees got so high that everything just came to a halt because the cost of the transactions were ridiculous. If you have a system where the fees are reasonable and the usefulness of being able to do that with a friend is something that is something that really resonates, then the fee isn't going to be what stops them from wanting to use it. It's going to be something that they really want. I think that if you have, and it's very easy to have some, actually, as a matter of fact, you can have something like that within the Peerplays blockchain very easily. It's just a matter of the other benefits that come from being a part of a public decentralized blockchain like that. For example, if you were to place those bets, and then those bets, of course, are recorded on the blockchain, your activity could be a part of your gamified user profile, which allows you to be able to now gain more credits in regards to being a real active user sort of thing. So while you may be paying a fee, you're gaining certain social credibility amongst the community. So there's always a trade-off, right? So you can do it without fees if you want to, using certain platforms, and there's other platforms which are going to charge a fee. So.
All right, thank you, everybody, once again. I'm being kicked off is what's happening. No, I'm joking.
I want to say thank you to all of you for participating. This was super interesting. I was remiss and I forgot to thank Hamilton Brook Smith Reynolds, who is our sponsor tonight. So I wanted to say thank you to Judy and her team and Giovanna, who have always supported our organization and brought this great panel to you tonight. So thank you guys. And with that, head on upstairs.